there are deeply rooted beliefs, not only by lawyers, but about other people about how law firms should be operating, how things should be done. But I think the reality of that is that it doesn't have to be that way.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hi, Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. I have attorney Blinn Bates here today, but I don't want to spend too much time introducing Blinn because I want Blinn to introduce himself. And here's how I'd like you to do it, Blinn. Let's tell the story from the moment you knew you were in trouble, the moment you knew that there was a problem. What was happening? What were you doing? And tell the audience what was going on.
Sure. I appreciate you having me. And it was just over 2 years ago. So it was March 29th of 2023. And I don't want to bore you with a lot of the back details, but what I was doing is I was doing some training. I got a private pilot's license back in 2014. And at some point I decided I wanted to take that a little further, some additional training, some instrument training and things like that. And so that's kind of what we had done at the beginning of the evening. And it was a beautiful night. The weather was perfect, so we did some training. I went up in the airplane with another gentleman who was a flight instructor and had given me some training before. And we did what we wanted to do. But, it was one of those nights where we said, let's just do some flying. Let's enjoy the weather a little bit. And I needed to get some currency. So we did that.
Well, let me interrupt you. What type of plane is it? Describe to the audience what the plane looks like so people have a sense of what you're flying.
Sure. This is a single engine airplane. It's a Piper Cherokee 6. So it had 6 seats in the airplane. It's a smaller aircraft and bigger for me than what I learned on. What I learned on was a 2-seater. It was just a little bitty plane, but this was a much more powerful, to me, airplane than what I learned on. It was an airplane that I had bought with a friend of mine who was also a pilot several years before. So we were flying around in this, and I did a couple landings. To get current, I needed 3, so I did a couple. We took off again, nothing out of the ordinary, and I'm coming around, and we were going to finish up. I remember my son was playing baseball.
And how old's your son? How old's your son?
My son at the time would have been 11. He's 13 now.
Okay.
And actually, the third time we came around, we went over the field they were playing, so I could see, what was going on. We're not real high up, and came around. Everything was fine, and could see the runway actually, and I could see, just from my experience, that I was a little bit high. And so when you're a little bit high, you pull the power back a little bit and you sink down. And I did that. And when I got where I wanted to be and I was set up, I pushed the power back on to get to the runway, and nothing happened. And I remember thinking to myself, that's not good. And I remember saying to my passenger, Larry, we don't have any power. And we were probably at the time about a quarter of a mile from the runway. So we were close. I mean, we were coming in, and it's a pretty critical point in the landing. And we were probably, I would guess, 300 or 400 feet off the ground. And without power, the aircraft was heavy. So it went down quickly. I mean, it was pretty much like flying a brick at that point. And so I don't remember anything from that point, but we did get onto the ground. My passenger did have recollection of that, and he said I took us to the ground. We obviously didn't have a lot of choice of where to land. We landed where we could. When we did make impact with the ground, it was we were going pretty quickly, and then ultimately we hit what amounted to a flower box, and a tree took off one of the wings, and we both survived. We both had injuries. I still do not have recollection of that period of time, but God said more to do, so we made it.
The pictures are pretty dramatic. So we're going to put pictures up on the screen for those that are watching this on YouTube. We'll put a link for people that want to check it out in the show notes. But you crash landed. I mean, it's not like you're talking like you landed. You crashed, and you got some pretty significant injuries, and so did your your passenger. So when did you wake up? You lost recollection. You remember you lost power. The plane's going down. It's crashing basically, and you guys survive. But when did you get conscious again? Like, when did you wake up?
Yeah, so I hit my head. This isn't a car with an airbag or anything. I mean, it's just you got the dash there, and so I hit my head. I had some pretty significant cuts on my head. I broke my nose. I had 4 crushed vertebrae. We both had very similar injuries. The vertebrae in my case were all in the right spot. They weren't shattered. They were just smushed, and luckily that didn't affect much. It just had to heal. I kind of came to, and the fire and police and EMTs were all there, and they told me after the fact that I was asking kind of the same 3 questions, like, what's going on, where am I, and where's all this blood coming from?
Pretty legitimate questions. They're really ridiculous.
Yeah, legitimate questions. Like when you wake up.
In any particular, where am I? What's going on? And what's all this blood?
Well, and I remember my passenger was telling the firefighters that had to get the jaws of life out to cut the top off to get us out. Do not spark anything, because there's 70 gallons of fuel on this airplane, and we'll go up in flames.
It's amazing that he had the conscious awareness to be able to tell them that at the time. I mean, that's in itself impressive.
It's not something you would wish to happen to anyone, but if it did, he's the type of person you would want to be with you. He has thousands of hours of, airline flying and experience, and very knowledgeable. So, he was the guy. He was worried. He told me at one point that he was yelling at me to keep the nose down so we didn't stall. And I said, well, I don't remember it anyway, but I would have been happy for any input at that point.
The understatement of the year. I'd have been happy for any input at that point. Oh, man. Wow. And my recollection is that you were, you were, I mean, there's pretty serious injuries. And so were you hospitalized for a while? What happened next?
It was kind of crazy. So I went by ambulance to the hospital, and they kind of sewed me back up and put me together, and I spent the night in the hospital. They discharged me the next day. I went home. I sat in the recliner and convalesced for a little while. I was in some pain, but I was able to walk. I was able to do all these things that, those are some of the things that go through your mind when you do start to realize what's happened. Like, am I even going to be able to walk? And you don't know.
Oh my gosh. Your family must have been terrified.
They were. My parents drove back. They live in Florida, so they drove back home. They said they needed to see with their own eyes that I was actually alive. I said, I could have talked to you on the phone. And they're like, no, we needed to see it.
Well, there's no way. There's no way. I think I'm with your parents. I think my wife would be like, there's no way she's going to be satisfied with a phone call. She's going to be, we're going. I don't care where it's at. We're going.
Yeah.
Wow. 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 So you were, and what's wild about this is that you were scheduled to do a podcast with me right before this happened. And all I knew is that you canceled the podcast, and I never knew the reason why. And we wanted to interview you then because you were making some great progress. You were on the growth programs. You're making some great progress. And I want to get you on to share with people what you were doing to give them encouragement and support that they can make some changes in your practice. So let's talk a little bit about the practice. And then let's talk a little bit about before the plane accident, the plane crash, and a little bit after, because I think the lessons, and you have some really interesting lessons to share with people. So I usually encourage people to, if they want to test their law firm, to take great vacations, take great vacations. You win. I'm going to test a law firm by wrecking my plane.
We're going to see how it
We're
does.
going to see how it does because, taking time off, that's for wimps. I'm going to wreck a plane, man. That's what I'm going to do. So you were in a growth program. You're implementing stuff. Talk a little about your practice history, because you're a third generation owner and you're in a small community in Illinois. So talk a little bit about briefly about the history of the firm, then the funny story about how you got introduced to Atticus, and then what you implement, what your practice was like and what you implemented, because I want people to take away from your experience some practical how-to lessons in their own practice.
Yeah, so our firm is Woods and Bates. Our main office is located in Lincoln, Illinois. As you mentioned, I am a third generation attorney with our firm. So my grandfather started the firm with another gentleman. That was in about 1972. My dad then went to law school, and he came back and joined the firm after he graduated in about 79. And he was here from his graduation until I came back to work for him in 2008. For a lot of the time, he was there alone. He worked with my grandfather, and my grandfather's law partner became my dad's law partner for several years before he retired. Probably the majority of the time, my dad was a solo practitioner. And, when I got done with law school, or to the end of law school, I decided it was about 2008, and having a job sounded pretty appealing at that time. So, came back home. It was not something I ever intended to do. It was actually something that I actively avoided for quite a while. But we said my now wife and I decided we were going to come back, and we'd give it 5 years. And that was in 2008. So here we are now. He retired. My dad retired in 2016-ish. And I worked alone for about a year before I realized that it was going to crush me if I didn't hire somebody else, because we had a pretty thriving practice with 2 lawyers. And when we went down to 1, we were still doing the same volume of work. And it was a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. This is the challenge that, in succession planning and intergenerational practices like this, that when you have a senior partner retire, you really don't appreciate the volume of work they can handle and the skill set they have. I usually, if I've got a retiring partner, I usually aim for replacing them with 2 lawyers. And usually they underprice work. So they're actually doing more volume than you realize because they're not pricing correctly. Right? So I think it was a wise decision. You probably had more work than you could handle at very modest prices. So a lot of volume.
A lot of volume and a lot of time commitment. But that I think you're going to hear a theme in my story, in my life, is things have happened, and I think they happened for a reason. But at the time that I had posted the job, a gentleman contacted me who had seen it. He was a native of Lincoln, and he was at a different firm at the time. And he said, I'd really like to come home and So we'll come in, we'll talk about it and see if we can make this work. And it's worked ever since. He is now my law partner, Michael Fleshman, and he came to Atticus with me, and he was going to be on the podcast right before I wrecked the airplane. And he said, you can get time off easier than this. There's other ways.
There's other ways to take time off than crashing a plane, Blinn. I mean, you don't have to wreck a plane to take time off, right?
Right. But at that time, we had been in the Atticus program for just over a year, and we'd made some good progress. And, I learned quite a bit with the basics of the program on what we needed to do. And we'd done some of those things, and we were going to talk about some of those things. And it's in hindsight, I'm really glad that we did, because I think the way that we were operating before that, it would have been a huge mess, especially if it was just me. But the way that I came to learn about Atticus was, again, it was just one of those things. And I was listening to a CLE, continuing ed, and Mark Metzger was the presenter, and the host of the CLE was drawing occasionally prizes. And I was kind of zoned out, and I heard my name, and I'd won something, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. And, I just thought, well, wasn't paying attention, whatever, I'll figure it out at some point. And shortly after that, continuing ed, curiosity got the better of me, and I emailed somebody and I said, what did I win? And they said, it's a practice diagnostic from Atticus. I said, okay, well, I don't know what that is. Are they going to call me? And they said, yeah, they'll be in touch. And so they did. And I thought, what the heck, I'll do it. And that's kind of how I came to know about Atticus. And they told me more about the program. And at the time, the practice was chaotic. It was quite frankly pretty miserable. And they were offering a solution. And I thought, well, it's worth a shot. I can't get it any worse.
Well, it's probably one of the most unusual ways that someone's come to Atticus, and I'm going to have to encourage Metzger to do more teaching and give more of these away, because you're perfect. You're a great part of the Atticus community. It's great to have you in our program. So I'm like, maybe we should just give a whole bunch of these things away. I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to talk to Rachel in the marketing department about that. So, if you could think about the 3 things that you changed in the practice prior to the plane crash that stopped, kind of helped you not have as miserable of a experience practicing, what would they be? Like, I changed this, this, and this. What would the top 3 be?
Thinking back on it, some of the first things that we did, that Atticus suggested that we do, was deal with things like interruptions. I was running a chaotic practice. It was a email chase. It was a phone call chase, constant interruptions. I was a firefighter. I was putting out the fire of that second or that hour and never really accomplishing anything. I'd get to the end of the day and it'd be like, I don't even know what I did today. We had, what I've heard referred to as threshold law is what we practiced. Anything that came in the door is what we did. We had no real discernment as to the types of cases we were going to take or the types of clients we were going to take. And that was a type of practice that took a lot of time because it was very chaotic. So I was spending a lot of time, nights, weekends, catching up on the work that I needed to be doing during the week when I was doing all those things like chasing emails and phone calls and putting out fires. So just kind of bringing some order to that, with scheduling and doing the interruptions log and the client matrix and figuring out who do we want to be and who do we want to be representing and what kind of lifestyle do we want to be living and how do we get to that. And those were the things at first that we used from Atticus.
Yeah, that's interesting because as I think about your practice, you have what I would consider an heirloom legacy practice. You inherit it more or less from your father and grandfather. But it's not that you, quote, inherit it from a financial perspective, but you inherit a way of thinking about the practice, which was kind of a neighborhood, small town mindset that we do any type of practice that our neighbors need. And it gave you probably the greatest opportunity to really take a step back and redefine who are we? How do we serve them? How does this support my great life, my great practice? And gave you permission, it sounds like, to redefine who you are as a practitioner and what the practice is today, not what it used to be. Is that a fair statement?
I think that is a fair statement. And the way that it was is the only way that I ever knew. And some of the ways that my grandfather was successful, for instance, don't necessarily work anymore. I mean, when he was practicing law, being good at being a lawyer was just about all you needed. I mean,
yeah,
there wasn't marketing, there wasn't advertising, there wasn't this, that, and the other thing. He was very good at what he did, and the business and the revenue flowed from that. And that was very much the same for my dad. And they were both great attorneys, and that's all they really needed to be. And that's changed. Our practice has changed. The industry has changed.
Yeah, just the technology alone and the application of technology versus how your father and your grandfather used to practice alone is transformative, right? It's totally transformative. And you're now competing with the internet. You're not competing with the lawyer down the street. So there's a lot of radical changes there that required you to reshift the culture of the firm and reshift your own mindset, your own thinking about it. Anything else that you can think of before I ask you the next question that you'd like to say, yeah, we also changed this and changed that?
I think adapting to the technology was a big shift that we have made over the last 3 or 4 years. We very much we tried to stay ahead of it, but we weren't where we are now, with practice management programs, client intake programs, credit card processing, all those types of things. We had never needed them or never thought we needed them. And it changes so quickly. I can't imagine doing business without them now. But even 5-10 years ago, our practice would be unrecognizable to the way that it used to be done. My dad didn't retire that long ago. It was only 8 or 9 years ago, but he would not recognize the way that we do things today if he came back in and started working again, which I don't think he would do.
Yeah, well, thank God, right? Like, thank God he wouldn't recognize it. So, I mean, it's good work. One of the terms that you've used about the plane crash is the term forced exile. What does that mean?
So exile is a term that I have learned since that, but it is a total removal from the practice, whether that's planned or whether that is unplanned. In my case, at that point, it was unplanned. But, it's actually an exercise that we do now where we plan for, okay, Blinn's going to be gone for these 10 days. And when he's gone for these 10 days, the rules are you can't contact him. You got to make decisions while he's gone. There can't be things that are just lingering out there for when he comes back, and that the office has to continue to operate the way that it does now. So when it's planned, it's more of preparing for the unplanned, I guess, and we had never taken that on before we had to. But it's an exercise that I've found to be very valuable because it shows us, the weak points of that. If I'm gone and something isn't getting done the way that it needs to be done, we can see, okay, why? What do we need to do? What do we need to change to make sure that that's not the case? If the file needs to be given to another attorney in the office so that they can deal with the issue that's arisen while I'm gone. How are we doing that? Are we doing that appropriately? And, is our revenue continuing to generate as well so that it helps a person that's been exiled so that they can have a break, which I never took before that. Not really. It was always quote unquote vacation, but the email was still on, the phone was still on, that type of thing. So you're never really taking a true break. But with the exile, you get that true break. The office isn't bothering you. The clients aren't bothering you. You have to, I have to work at that. That's difficult for the first 3 or 4 days to really disconnect.
But it's incredibly difficult for the first couple of days. Why is it important to the business that you put yourself in an exile position? Like, why is it important to the business? What's it do for the business?
So, one of the main things that we do is estate planning. That's planning for the ultimate demise. I mean, we're all at some point going to die. And whether that's today or 50 years from now, part of our professional work is planning for that. And all too often, I have seen solo and small firms that just go into crisis when something unexpected happens to the main lawyer in the firm. And I think that exile process helps with trying to build something that's going to be perpetual and continue on, even if I don't, or somebody else in the organization doesn't. I'm talking about me mainly, but we're going to try to do it for other positions as well, because all of them are important, and we want to make sure there's no gaps if something happened to somebody else either. But making that organization bigger than just one person is not only beneficial to us, but it's going to be really beneficial to the people that we serve, because the firm's still going to be there for the clients, even if I go away or somebody else goes away.
Perfect. The one thing I hope that the audience hears is that the exile exercise. So the exile exercise you can do the way Blinn does, which is crash a plane. Or you could, I'm just saying, Blinn, come on. Or you could say, okay, what I'm going to do we do it, the exile exercise, we do a lot in group programs. And the purpose of the exile, for those of you who are listening, is that you go through an imaginary exercise where you basically got 90 days to prepare for a 6-month exile. And you have to look at the 5 most critical things that you do inside the firm. It takes a little bit of time to think about that. And what Blinn is doing brilliantly is saying you need to apply that to everyone in the firm. But the ultimate reason you're doing it and the benefit that you're doing it is not only to improve the firm, but to improve the firm for the client. And a lot of lawyers kind of think that's ultimately about you. If you take the time off and have a great exile, that's terrific. Like in my case, I take huge trips. I call them Great Life Adventures, 5 weeks, 8 weeks. And we do it to test the business from our perspective. And they're fantastic trips. I just recommend the trips over the plane crashes, Blinn.
Well, it's one of those things that you'll come to learn about me is sometimes it takes extreme actions for me to get the message. These are things that people have told me before, but it's like, 3 days after the accident, I'm picking up my laptop.
Oh my
because
God.
That's what a good lawyer does. I mean, there's clients to be served, right? And I pick it up and I turn it on, and about 5 or 10 minutes in, I realize that I have a massive concussion, and this is just, it's not happening. I can't.
You have crushed vertebrae, a massive concussion, a broken nose, and more than likely you're on painkillers.
Right. And I just can't do it. I've never had a concussion before then, but having had one, it's looking at a screen, looking at a computer, whatever it is. I mean, it took weeks and months to get back to normal, whatever normal is for me, but it was rough. But it forced the issue is where I'm going, I guess. It forced the issue of me to say, I just can't, and my body won't let me. So we've got to make it work.
Hi, Steve. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but if you're new to Atticus and you're listening to our podcast and you don't understand how Practice Advisor works, if you're curious on how to work with a practice advisor, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, and I'm going to give you a complimentary, no-charge practice growth diagnostic. So you can talk to one of our membership directors about how to work with a practice advisor. That if you've never had the opportunity to work one-on-one with one of our top flight practice advisors, I'm going to encourage you, as you listen to this episode, ask yourself, would somebody like this be able to help me and help me grow my practice and help me cultivate a great life? With that, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. So after the plane crash, how has your outlook on life, like your great life, changed? And then how's your outlook on the practice changed? Let's take first life, then practice.
So I would say my faith grew a lot stronger. Again, it takes some extreme things for me, and if I haven't experienced miracles before in my life, which I have, on several occasions, but I don't know many people that wouldn't agree with that being a miracle that we walked away. And it really shaped my thinking about what's really important and what my priorities really are. And I always had a list of these are my priorities, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But my actions didn't really fall in line with what I said my priorities were, because it was, faith, family, work, yada, yada, yada. But work was always number one. And it got all the time. And, the family got the leftovers. And one of the things I did a few days after the accident is my son had another baseball game. And so I went and I was able to sit in the car in the outfield and watch the game. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I've got to prioritize this. I've got to find a way to do these things, because he's 11 at this point. My daughter's 7, I don't know where those years went, but got to prioritize this while we can.
What are the kids' names? What's your wife's name? So just give us a picture of the family.
So my wife's name is Julie, and we met in college, and she moved back with me to Lincoln. We have 2 children. My son is the oldest. He's 13, Colin. And then my daughter's 9. She's Emma.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you're sitting there in the outfield watching him play ball, and you're going, how do I reprioritize my life? And so you're kind of sitting there reflecting on it. What happens? What comes to your mind?
The accident had a pretty profound effect on them. And I kind of learned that after the fact. I didn't think they were old enough to kind of figure out what was going on, but they certainly were. They knew after they saw me, this was pretty bad, and I think they knew that it could have been worse. And so I'm thinking, I've got to prioritize this, but I'm not quite sure how to do it. Maybe that means I work less and I make less money. I sacrifice some of the things that I want to do so that I can do this. I'm not real sure how to do it. Those are kind of the things that are rolling around in my head at that point.
Important, because the skill set, how to prioritize what's important. You're like, okay, I gave this stuff. Here's what I said was important, but I really don't think I was aligning my actions with it. And this is important for the audience members, because a lot of people know that they're out of integrity with what they say they want in their great life, what they want in their great practice. And what's missing, that gap between what you want and where you're at, is either a skill set, an action that you need to develop, a habit, something, but there's something in that gap. What did you do next? How did you figure this out?
So some of the things that we were learning through Atticus was delegation, hiring, staffing. I had done some of that, not well, but I had done some of that. And it was kind of learning how to do that stuff better. And that's an ongoing learning activity for me, of how to better delegate, how to better hire, how to better manage, and I'm still learning as I go here. But one of the really impactful books that I read along the way was How to Buy Back Your Time.
The Dan Martell book, Buy Back Your Time. Yeah, it's a great book.
Really good stuff, and just kind of makes you think about how to do that, how to better delegate, how to let other people accomplish tasks. And as I've done that, my delegation has changed from I need you to do this, 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 and this, and here's how you need to do it, and get it to me, ASAP. To here's the result that I'm looking for. We need to get this accomplished if we can by such and such a date, and let me know if you have questions. More of a results and letting people run with it. Because believe it or not, other people are better at a lot of things than I am. And that took me a long time to figure
I know
out.
you're laughing, but in my life, I have many people pointing this out to me. So, so it's important because what you described. There's two things for our audience, and we'll put links into Dan's book. It's one of the things we recommend in our group programs to read the book. There's two elements of the book that you're referencing. Well, one element of the book that you're referencing, which is to figuring out what your buyback rate is, which basically, for those of you listening, that's either a quick cheat sheet if you're an attorney or a team leader, is probably about 25% of what your billable rate is. So if you're billing $400 an hour and you're making 100, you can delegate anything for $100 an hour or under. There's different ways of calculating this, and this formula has been around for a while, but Dan does a great job of describing in his book. The second thing that you're doing is describing strategic delegation versus task delegation. As you grow your practice, you start to learn how to do strategic delegation, which is how to delegate process, not tasks inside the process. So these are really good jumps, and I'm just pointing them out for the audience so they can hear it and say, well, how do I learn from Blinn and apply this in my life without crashing a plane as a rule of thumb? Like, how do I learn these things? So sorry, Blinn, I will tease you, but I am in awe of you. You're just like explaining this thing that's so terrifying, and you walk away from it and you're so calm and steady and cool and collected. And I'm like, I know so many people that will still be in therapy from this, like they would still be recovering from it emotionally, not just physically, but emotionally. So let me go back to what else has shifted in your outlook. So we've reorganized faith, family, and the firm. And then we're reorganizing the firm. What else have you changed in the firm? Buy back your time, we talked about. What else?
We've made some additional hires along the way, to have some additional capacity. We've made some changes with staffing along the way. Just continuing to try to make progress in those areas has been huge, because it's allowed me to free up more of my time to do some of the other things. As the business grows, the time outlay for running the business has become increasingly more and more. So I'm doing a lot more of that versus client work, and having other attorneys to be able to do that client work is necessary, or else I'm going to end up doing all of it again, and having employees to be able to help out with that. We've really adopted this team approach where everybody pitches in and everybody gets the job done. Whatever needs to be done, it gets accomplished, and it's become a really decent place to be. It used to be, it used to not be that way.
Yeah.
It used to be a place that I dreaded going. It used to be a place that I avoided sometimes.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Like most lawyers I know would fire themselves from their own firms if they could, because they're miserable. I say sometimes they have an abusive relationship with their own law firm. They're being abused by it. And so they start to resent it. They start to hate it. They start getting frustrated. And what you've done over time is that and this is really what the whole company and the community is about, is you're starting to build a great practice. Right now, we're not at great practice, it sounds like. Right now, we're at decent practice. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, we're still working at it.
Yeah.
We one of the biggest changes with figuring out what kind of cases we want to handle, and more importantly, I think not handle. Some of the matrimonial work and custody work and things like that was being done was bringing so much chaos to the firm, and we just don't do that anymore. And that's sometimes scary when you're saying these are the types of clients that we're looking for, and we're not going to do other work. You're shutting the door on revenue, and the thoughts that go through your head are, man, are we going to be able to make this up in these other areas? Are we going to be able to have enough work if we say we're not doing these other things? We've always been generalists. Is this going to work out? Are we going to be struggling? And it has worked out, and I think it continues to work out. But those thoughts still, from time to time, when it starts to get a little bit slow, they come back, and it's a lot of change in thinking and a lot of reaffirmation from people like you and Mark Metzger and people that believe it's going to work, and helping us believe it's going to work too.
Well, I appreciate that. I will tell you it does work, because everybody that I've coached and myself, we've been through that same process. So the process of how do you really focus on great clients and what a great client looks like, and how to bring in great clients, which ties more or less to great marketing. So when you look at your practice now, what have you done from a marketing perspective? Because I hear everything operationally, which sounds terrific. Is there anything that you've adopted to improve your marketing, to improve great clients, to improve the quality of work quality of cases that you're doing, I should say?
We have. So, personally, I've worked on trying to do the 3 marketing contacts a week or more, doing those types of things, writing notes to clients or to referral sources, or, whoever it may be, thanking them for business, or just having those touch points. But probably one of the most impactful things we've done is we hired a marketing company, Legrand Marketing, to help us. And they do a great job. When I explain it to people, I tell them that they do all of the things that you would want to do as a business owner when it comes to marketing without having to do it yourself. And it's been phenomenal.
Sean will be very happy to hear that. Right. He'll be very happy to hear. He'll be very happy to get a great shout out from you during the podcast. So one of the big things that you did was to actually strategically delegate to Legrand some of the marketing elements that you needed done in the firm. And so what you did is that you found a collaborator, a strategic partner. What else did you do from a marketing perspective? You did the 3 marketing contacts, obviously. That's huge. That's a classic. That's how I started, which was 3 marketing contacts per week. What else? Is there anything else that you're doing?
We've, with their help, we've started to be able to do things like free seminars, or webinars, that type of thing, client appreciation events, or all those types of things. But, those are things that can be kind of a time suck. But when you have people helping you on the back end, like producing the PowerPoint presentations and doing those things with advertising and posting it on social media so that you can get people registered and dealing with the registrations and things like that, it really becomes I got to show up and I got to talk about stuff that I know about, and that I enjoy that. That's the good part. That's the part that I'm supposed to be good at. So
I'm supposed to be good at. I'm supposed to be good at this stuff. So when you look out in the future for your practice, what's probably the biggest thing that you want to change about your practice to go from decent to great? If I said, okay, Blinn, you said you have a decent practice. What would be a great practice in the future for you?
I think a truly great practice for us would be one that's perpetual, that continues on, far beyond me, far beyond those of us that are here now, and continues to serve the clients that we serve and the communities that we serve now, and continues the legacy of the guys that came before me, my dad and my grandpa and Bob Woods and those guys started it, and it's still going. We're 50 plus years in at this point, but I'd like to see it be another 50, 100, 200 more years. Just keep going and going. And I think to do that along those lines, I think at some point I'm going to have to, or I would like to transition into more of a CEO type role for the firm. So that's kind of my roadmap at this point.
I love it. I love it. So your goal is I'm going to create a perpetual firm that I can see another 50 to 100, 150 years in the future with. And to get there, I have to move myself to CEO. I have to be more of a leader. I have to build up the whole firm from an infrastructure perspective. And I'm going to stand on the shoulders of the lawyers that came before me, which, my dad, grandpa, Mr. Woods, we're going to take this legacy that they've created, and I'm going to really exponentially build it up. So what they were committed to from a values perspective continues here in Lincoln. I love it. I love it. If you think about it and you could give advice to other lawyers other than crashing the plane, what would you recommend they do based on your experience? What would you say, look, if there's anything you take away from me, this is it?
I think the one thing I would say is even very, very small progress starts to build. Even if you just take on one thing at a time, and that's really all you can do is say, I'm going to work on this and try to figure out where I want to go and how I want to get there. Doing a little bit at a time is eventually going to grow exponentially. When I first sat down in that group program, I told you that a couple of weeks ago, I was overwhelmed. There's just so much to do, and there still is so much to do, but just getting started. One of the first things they told us to do in our group program was, we want you to go home and we want you to clean your office. And I'm sitting there thinking, what? I came all the way down here for this? You're going to tell me to go clean my office?
Yeah. Keep going. I like this.
So I did. I mean, I was willing at that point. I'm willing to do what is being suggested, and I've gotten to that point in my life where I'm willing to take some suggestions. And so I'm going to go do that. And I did it. And it took me the better part of half of a day to clean out my office.
That's pretty good. Half a day is pretty good. That was a pretty clean office.
I found some interesting things. I mean, I've got a desk that's been here ever since the firm started. So there's some stuff in the back of this desk that was from, way back in the 50s.
You're the first guy to clean the desk since 1950.
Yeah, we don't clean. We're lawyers. We just stick it somewhere else and keep it.
That's awesome. So what did you find? You have to tell me. What did you find from it?
There were some old briefs I found, like some old Supreme Court briefs. There was old notary stamps. You've seen the notary stamps now.
Awesome.
They're just the little stamp. These are the like big, huge, heavy metal stamps that crimp the paper. And
were you going to put them in a law firm somewhere, like in the conference room? It's like a museum. You should have these things like put somewhere.
Yeah, some pretty cool things.
They're very cool things. They're cool and fun and a nod to the past. I mean, they're totally cool. So when you went back, and this is what I like about you, is that as the plane was crashing, you turned to the co-pilot and said, I'm open to input. So, from a coaching perspective, you're like, okay, clean the office. Okay, I'm open to input on that. It's kind of silly, but I flew all the way here to clean my office. What did you learn when you cleaned your office other than finding stuff from the 50s? What did you learn?
I learned that there's a lot of stuff that's just being, didn't need to be there. You don't need this stuff. You need to get rid of it. You need to shed some of it, and that's true throughout the office and throughout my house. We hang on to stuff that we can just get rid of. One of the things that I didn't truly understand until I did it was having the clean environment that come into is better. It's much better to come into that environment where everything's clean and you don't have 8,000 files sitting on your desk and the mental strain of that, because then you're reliving every time you look at them, all the things that need to be accomplished, and just getting those into file cabinets and setting up the system so that it doesn't get missed. I mean, got to still have reminders and things like that, but I don't necessarily need the file sitting on my desk to remind me to do the thing. And so it really helped with just kind of having some mental clarity to start the day and not have all that baggage.
So the record for me, the first time I taught the DY, not the first time, but one of the times I taught the DYR program, Double Your Revenue Workshop, I had this fantastic lawyer. And back in the day, it was a 2-day workshop. And I had this fantastic lawyer from Texas come, but he comes and he brings his assistant and he sits there in the workshop and like his mind's blown. And he's like, okay, this is just crazy. And he goes back, and my recommendation to him was the first thing you need to do is clean your office so you can figure it out, because cleaning your office is a diagnostic tool. You look and say, okay, why is this here? What's this? What's this going on? A 1950s notary stamp. Why do I need that? And so, you got to think of it like a surgical room. If you walk into a surgical room and you look at the surgeon's surgical room, if there's a scalpel there and bloody bandages and stuff like that, you're like, someone's not clean. They're not operating their practice efficiently and effectively. Your office is a diagnostic tool to talk about what's breaking down or not working in your practice. So this lawyer, after taking the double your revenue, so the whole goal of the workshop is to figure out how to double your revenue. So he comes back a year later and goes, I haven't doubled my revenue, but I did clean my office. It took 1 week. The first day, my assistant and I took out 13 bags of trash. And it basically took him a week to really organize his office. And so he spent the whole year getting his practice ready to double, but he didn't double. So he came back to the workshop a year later and said, okay, now I'm ready. Like, I got the decks clear. I cleaned up the trash. I got rid of bad cases. I got rid of bad clients. And I got rid of my bad thinking. Now I'm ready. And he's grown it in a 10-year period. He grew it 7-fold. And so, and then he grew it again, and then he sold it. So the point of the story was, in which I really appreciate your open input, which I like, is that the office sometimes is a reflection of our thinking, and what we allow to occur in the office and the breakdowns and what's on our desk is usually telling stuff. Now, when I coach larger firms, one of the reasons I get the lawyers to clean the office is because I want the cash off the desk. Does that make sense? You know what I mean by that? So tell me what I mean by that.
If it's just sitting there, I mean, the work's not getting done, you're not billing for it, that type of thing.
Yeah, the average law firm, they're using their desk as, cash inventory management. They're like, okay, these cases will work on next week, those cases will work on the week after, and they're getting confused with inventory management with cash management. I want the cash. I don't care about the inventory. I want the cash that the inventory produces. So it takes a while to learn that. So good work. I mean, really, Blinn, I have to tell you, I'm glad that you're open to input. I really am. What else would you tell our colleagues out there? Because you're so unique in your experience, you're so unique in your practice, but everything that you're doing in the practice is a common experience that every single lawyer, every single team member can totally relate to, from interruptions to client selection to time management to a messy office to just trying to figure out how do I go from a terrible practice to a decent practice and ultimately looking for great. What else would you say?
I would say that it's worth the investment of doing the work. Like I said, at the point when I learned about Atticus, I know what the name for it is now. I didn't know what it was then, but I was burnt out. I was totally and completely burnt out. I'm sick of coming in here. I never get anything done, getting interrupted all the time. I'm just chasing emails. I got clients calling me on Sunday afternoon wanting me to do things. And it's like, I don't want to do this anymore, And you've talked on your podcasts about the statistics with lawyers and they're grim. I mean, it's brutal. It can be a brutal profession. It can be really, really stressful. It can be, the stats with alcohol abuse and drug abuse and suicide. And,
it's ugly.
We see it.
It's
bad health.
It's ugly.
That's not even in the statistics is the bad health. But, we tend to not take care of ourselves. We tend to sacrifice our own well-being, our family's well-being, statistics with divorce and things like that. And I would just say that it doesn't have to be that way. And that was a hard, shouldn't have been, but it was a hard mental shift for me to change my thinking around how things ought to work, because this as well as anyone, there are deeply rooted beliefs, not only by lawyers, but about other people, about how law firms should be operating, how things should be done. Um, but I think the reality of that is that it doesn't have to be that way. These are our businesses, especially in businesses like ours. We have 3 lawyers and 5 staff members. We're not a 3,000 lawyer firm. These are businesses where we can be nimble, we can make changes, we can make them work for us, and we don't have to be slaves to the way things have always been. And it took me a while to figure that out, but still learning. It's
Yeah, but you're open to input, like you said, and these are, like you said, beliefs. They're not truths. And sometimes you confuse beliefs and truths, and that's where people get hung up. That's where people get confused because they think a belief is true. And so you're working through like, well, maybe this is not a truism for me. Like this belief is not a valid thing. I need to re-examine it. And that's hard work to kind of take a step back. Any other advice? Because I got one that I learned from a member that I'd like to share when it works for you, because it's a great piece of advice.
I think that's the biggest one, is just, changing our thinking around that. What comes to mind to me is when my grandfather was alive, I was talking to him about, the things we're doing. And even then I knew that for me, I didn't want to do divorce work. I didn't want to do custody work. And I'd made that decision. And, he told me when we were visiting one time, he said, you got to do the divorce for the client, for the longtime client of yours. And, those are just the things that you have to do. And I'm sitting there thinking, no, I don't. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, you don't. You don't have to. And that's exactly right. Your grandfather did because that's what he thought he needed to do. But he probably didn't. I mean, especially in a small rural community, I think there's an advantage to hyper specialization in a smaller community versus general practice. But that's a conversation that we can have for another time. One of the pieces of advice that one of the members gave me, which I always stuck with me, she like tripled her growth. And I asked her what was the secret. She says, get to the workshop. Like you just have to get to the workshop. The only thing you need to worry about is getting to the workshop. So, you get to your growth program, you get to your group program, get with your colleagues, just get there. And, once you get there, everything else will work its way out. But just get there, be there. Because that's one of the hardest things to do is, I got these demands at the office. I got this going on. I got that going on. There's a baseball game I might be missing. There's stuff happening in my life that I've got to prioritize getting to the workshop. And once I get to the workshop, I'll make some decisions. I'll make some small changes. And over time, those small changes will compound. All right, Blinn, next question. You ready?
I'm ready.
You going to fly again?
Maybe someday. I have not since, other than, Delta, Southwest, things like that. It is not something that I have any trepidation about doing. But I can tell you that the impact on my family was pretty great, and they have trepidation about me doing that. So I have not done it. I think any enjoyment I may get out of it would be totally negated by the time I got home. So
right.
It really wouldn't be worth it. But maybe sometime. I think it's kind of like the old when the single guy gets married and sells off the Harley and maybe buys it later in life when he's got the kids out of the house and onto their own things.
Totally get it. At one point in my life, I had a vanity car. And it was a yellow convertible Porsche. And I thought I would have made it when, as a 16-year-old, I made a goal of owning a Porsche. My wife after me driving this car for 2 years. I commuted back and forth to work very quickly in it, very nimbly, had a great time. My wife hated the car and just hated it, just hated it. And she didn't say anything for 2 years. And one day she goes, I just hate that car. And then she gave me all the reasons why she hated the car. And I took a step back and looked at it and said, what am I doing with this stupid? And, it wasn't a stupid car. It's a great car. But it's like, this is a vanity car. When you were 16, you wanted this car. But now you got 2 kids, a wife, you might drive it a little too fast. It's time to trade this in. And I did, I did. I totally get it. Maybe you sold the Harley. Now maybe you're not going to fly again. But what I really appreciate you doing is having the courage to share your story and what you learned from the story today. So on behalf of the Atticus community, on behalf of my colleagues, thank you for coming in here and sharing your great life. At the time, it didn't sound like a great life, but your great practice, great life journey. I really am grateful that you did it. I really appreciate the courage it took to tell the story. And I can say on behalf of everyone, we are so delighted that you are here to tell the story. I know your family is far more thrilled than we are, but we're delighted to have you part of the community. And I also am delighted that you're still open for input. I love that saying. So I'm open for input at this time. It's the most understated quote of all time. And you're just a calm, cool, understated guy. Any last words, my friend?
Just thanks for having me. It's been fun. Enjoyed talking with you about it. And I'm glad that I was able to find Atticus. Atticus has helped me with our practice and with my life. I've even implemented some of these things at home. We have a weekly family meeting where we try to bring some, calm to the chaos at home, and gotten the kids involved in that. And it helps a lot. I mean, just having that cadence and that rhythm. So I appreciate the work that you guys do for us. And thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. All our pleasure. Thank you, my friend. Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.